Diagnosing linguistic problems in English academic writing of university students, an item bank approach. The increasing demand for fine-grained information about students' language learning makes it necessary to develop effective diagnostic assessment instruments. Currently, there are three noticeable approaches to developing diagnostic language assessment instruments for assessing writing. The first approach is through detailed diagnostic rubrics or checklists. An example of this approach is a publication of Dr. Qin Xia appearing in Educational Psychology. In this study, a diagnostic checklist was developed to assess fine-grained aspects of student writing. The second approach to DLA is automated essay evaluation or corpus-based textual analysis. Examples of this approach are online AE tools such as Write to Learn, Grammarly, and MY Access. In another publication appearing in Assessing Writing, Dr. Qin Xia identified a list of linguistic features which can enable automated classification of texts with different diagnostic profiles. The third approach is the traditional indirect testing methods with discrete point items. Examples of this approach is Dylon and Delta. The third approach could be built based on a bank of items, also called item bank. An item bank can store a large number of items with information concerning the content and psychometric characteristics of each, so that users can select from this a set of items to construct a test which suits his/her requirements. Item banking is accumulative. New items developed later can have their features equated with existing ones via anchor items through item response theory, which allows independent estimation of item difficulty and fitness. In an earlier research, the researchers built an error-tagged corpus and identified 25 highly frequent, highly prevalent and grave errors in ESL Chinese students' academic writing. In the present study, the researchers designed and validated an item bank to diagnose these 25 linguistic problems in ESL Chinese students' English academic writing. Their research answered 4 research questions. 2 of them were: to what extent do the items have a sufficient range of difficulty to cover the range of English proficiency of the target students? Are measures of error difficulty corresponding to measures of error frequency and prevalence? The test items in their item bank adopted 8 traditional item types. The test items were developed based on authentic language materials, which were undergraduate students writing samples that were error-tagged in the previous study. These test items were distributed according to the errors they assessed and the item formats each item took. For instance, 6 items were developed to assess misuse of connectives error, among which 1 items took the format of grammatical judgment test. Altogether 219 items were developed and validated in this study. A total of 338 undergraduate students from 3 universities in Hong Kong participated in the validation study. They represented 3 English proficiency levels of high, intermediate or low. Accordingly, diagnostic tests of varied lengths were compiled to accommodate their different language proficiency and the available testing time. Students at different proficiency levels received tests with different lengths. To address the first question, the researchers compared the range of item difficulty and the range of students' ability. They found range of item difficulty was sufficiently wide to cover the range of target students' English abilities. The Rasch variable map, also called right map, shows the mapping of item difficulty against student ability distribution. On the left side is the distribution of all students' ability. Each star stands for 3 persons and students of the same ability were listed in the same row. Students of the lowest ability were listed at the bottom while students of the highest ability were listed on the top. Similarly, on the right side is the distribution of all items with different difficulty. As shown in the map, from the least difficult to the most difficult, the range of item difficulty is wider than the range of students' ability from the lowest to the highest. Based on the statistics of item difficulty, the researchers calculated error difficulty by aggregating the difficulties of the items designed to assess the same error. As this table shows, the connection error at the syntactic level was the easiest of all 25 errors, while topic commentary structure, another syntactic level error, was found to be the most difficult error. The second research question investigated the statistical relationship between measures of error difficulty based on rash modeling and the statistics of error frequency and error prevalence. The latter statistics were based on corpus-based text analyses and were generated in their previous study. In the present study, the researchers ran correlation analyses between error difficulty on one side and error frequency and error prevalence on the other. They expected to find positive correlations, which means highly frequent errors and error that affected a lot of students also show higher difficulty. However, the findings surprised the researchers. Except for the errors assessed using the MCQ format, all other correlations were found to be negative. The negative correlations mean that difficult errors were less frequent and less prevalent. The more frequent and prevalent errors, or common errors, tended to be less difficult for students to solve in the diagnostic test. This finding suggests that, different from the assumption that common errors were more difficult, commoner errors were actually easier in the diagnostic test. This research found both at the syntactic and lexical levels, commoner errors are easier. This finding was especially salient when common errors are assessed through the grammar judgment test format, where students were given sentences to judge whether it was grammatically correct or not first. Only if the sentence was considered incorrect, students were required to make a correction. Understandably, perhaps, it was much easier for students to recognize and correct common errors than less common ones. This finding means the common errors that frequently appear in ESL Chinese students' academic writing were not because these students did not have the grammatical knowledge, because when these errors were placed in a test item, students can easily identify these errors. These errors are more likely to stem from the complexity of using and applying the language in writing. These errors are error of usage and performance. Accordingly, the solution to overcome these errors was not to drill the students with more grammar, but to raise their awareness of the errors in their textual and linguistic context. Students need to learn and practice editing and proofreading their writing to reduce committing these common errors. At the theoretical and methodological level, this study found the diagnostic testing approach based on an item bank and the corpus-based textual analysis approach to DA are complementary to each other. Comparing with the corpus-based textual approach, the item bank approach to developing diagnostic tests was more useful in providing more precise information about the knowledge gaps. It also had the potential to pinpoint high-priority areas for remedial instruction.